Hi, we're back, and today we're going to get into the content of Chapter 6, and I hope you've had a degree of success with the content of Chapters 1 through 5. So let's get started here. We're dealing with the imperfect tense of lu. Now, the imperfect tense means past time and continuous action. That's what's going to be in view in this chapter. Let's look at some examples from Scripture. So all the Judean countryside and Jerusalem, they were going out to John and they were being baptized. One group after another, that's the past continuous. For the son in the far country, the son was longing. The pigs were eating. No one was giving. These imperfect verbs convey the sense of the hopelessness of this son over a period of time. For the disciples on the road to Emmaus, they say this: we were hoping, past continuous, that he was the one to redeem Israel. And then Jesus to his parents in the temple, why were you looking for me? Past continuous. Now, I want to draw a distinction between the imperfect tense and what's called the aorist tense. The imperfect is past continuous, and the aorist is past point. And think of it this way. Off to the left, you have a film strip with many slides to it. That's like the imperfect. To the right, you see a camera with one snapshot. That's point action. So imperfect tense, past time, continuous action. Now, here we encounter the imperfect active indicative of our paradigm verb luo. So we have a set of new forms here, so let's pronounce these together. Eluan, elus, eluen, eluamen, eluita, eluan. One more time. Eluan, elus, eluen, eluamen, eluita, eluan. Now we can notice some things that we've already learned. All right, take a look here for the first plural. We had that ending in chapter 1, first plural. We had the ending eta also in chapter 1 for the second person plural. We notice here that the first singular and the third person plural have the same forms. You say, how in the world can I distinguish? Well, it's going to be the context that will determine whether it's the first singular I or whether it's going to be the third person plural they. Now, what's on the front of all of these forms is the letter epsilon, and this is called a prefixed augment. It occurs before the stem. So, we have a picture here. And I want us to notice something here about the picture. It works from left to right. Here we have a person named P. Hogman for the prefix augment. He's a psychiatrist. Then we have Lou on the couch. And then we have the endings. So that's the pattern for the imperfect. Augment, stem, ending. Now, with his psychiatrist, Lou is speaking about his imperfect past. He's feeling guilt and recrimination about what he was doing in the past. He was loosing or destroying, and what was he destroying? An honest hen. Those are the singular endings. You see the Abe hat, honest Abe hat on the hen? Those are the singular, on-s-n. And what does this hen have on her hat? An omelet is on her hat. Those are the plural endings. So one more time. Prefix augment, Lou, his imperfect past, there's the indicator when he was destroying an honest hen with omelet on her hat. I trust that you can see the connections. All right, let's take a look at the imperfect middle passive. Let's say these together. Eluamein, eluu, eluita, eluamatha, eluista, eluanta. One more time. Eluamein, eluu, eluita, eluamatha, eluista, eluanta. Now, relate this to what we already know. Notice the amatha here. We had that in chapter 4 for the first person plural. In chapter 4, we also had the estha ending for the second person plural. And here in the third singular, eta is a little bit like etai that we had in chapter 4. And also in the third person plural, anta is very similar to what we had in chapter 4 with untie. So we have a picture for this as well. So let's take a look at it. All right, so left to right again, we have P. Hogman, and then Lou, and then the endings. So augment, stem, ending. Now, Lou's broken glasses will remind you of the imperfect tense. His sight was imperfect. Now, he was being loosed or destroyed by the indicator. That's imperfect, passive, indicative. You see the indicator blowing up? So he's talking to a psychiatrist about the time when a main blew atop. Now notice over here a main, a fire hydrant, a main, and is blowing its top. So a main blew atop. And who do we see again? We see Amethyst is the one on top. She's on top of that main. So a main blew atop. And Amethyst is the one on top. All right, we have a few examples here, and I'd like for you to hit the pause button. I'll do the same, and you do a little practice, and then we'll come back. All right, number 1 should be parsed as an imperfect, active, indicative, third person singular. He, she, or it was throwing. Number 2, gnoskamen. There we have a prefixed augment, stem, ending. So this is an imperfect, active, indicative, first plural. We were knowing. Elegon, imperfect, active, indicative, first singular or third plural. I was saying or they were saying. Number 4, ediokamatha, imperfect, middle passive, indicative, first person plural. We were being pursued or persecuted. There we have the middle passive ending. And number 5, doxadzanta, augment, stem, ending. Imperfect, middle passive, indicative, third person plural. They were being glorified. Now, let's talk about the prefixed augment. The prefixed augment will appear in one of 3 ways. On the forms that we just previously looked at, the prefixed augment appeared as an epsilon, as in baptizamen and genoskita. These are verbs that begin with consonants. So it shows up as an epsilon. Translation here would be, we were baptizing and you were knowing. Now, for verbs that begin with vowels, short vowels lengthen. So, for example, we have the alpha and the epsilon. Both of those are short sounds, aren't they? Ah and eh. What do? They lengthen to an eta. That's the long sound, a. So right underneath, you'll see akuon. That comes from akuo. Notice what happened to the alpha. It lengthened to the eta. So that's an imperfect, active, indicative, first singular or third plural. I was hearing or they were hearing. Ageron. That comes from agero. Agero starts with a short vowel, eh. So this would be translated as I was raising up or they were raising up. Now, following the same principle, if a word begins with the diphthong I, here's what it does. The alpha lengthens to the eta, and what happens below? The iota shows up below as a subscript. It's below or sub the script or under the letter. So Aaron right here comes from Iro. We have an augment stem ending. This is translated, I was taking up or taking away, or they were taking up or they were taking away. Now, we also have an omicron, which is a short sound, isn't it? It lengthens to the long O sound, O, the omega. So we haven't seen this word, aphalo, that means I owe. But here's what happens in the imperfect. The omicron lengthens to an omega, ophalon. I was owing, or they were owing. Now, the third possibility for the augment is this. When you have a compound verb, that is a verb that has a preposition and a verb, the augment is stuck right in between. It still occurs right before the verb stem. So, for example, we have the word ekbalo. I throw or I cast out. What happens here? The augment is stuck in between the preposition and the verb. Now, you may be wondering about this letter Xi here. This just happened as a matter of ease of pronunciation. Instead of stopping and starting ekabalata, that's a little hard to say, they put the S sound in there so you can say it quicker, exabalata. So this is parsed as an imperfect, active, indicative, second person plural. You were casting out. So some real rule reminders. Always parse your verbs from left to right. The imperfect verbs have three parts to them. You have your prefixed augment, then your stem, and then your ending. The present tense has only two parts, stem plus ending. And then know the rules for the prefixed augment. When your verb starts with a consonant, turns to an epsilon. When your word starts with a vowel, here's what happens. The alpha, the epsilon lengthen to a eta, the omicron to an omega. And for compound verbs, the preposition goes between the preposition and the verb itself. All right, a little practice here, and then I'll pause, you pause, and we'll talk about the results. All right, now that we're back, let's look at them. Ageron, imperfect, active, indicative, first singular, third plural. I was raising up or they were raising up. Akuen, from akuo. See the augment there with the lengthened alpha. Imperfect, active, indicative, third singular. He was hearing, she was hearing, it was hearing. Exobalomantha, we have a compound verb. We have the augment show up right here. Imperfect, middle passive, indicative, first person plural. We were being cast out. Aaron, from Iro. Iro means I take up or take away. Imperfect, active, indicative, first singular or third plural. I was taking up or they were taking up. Now, prasukamein. Prasukamai is a compound verb. And notice our augment right here. The epsilon of the root verb eukamai lengthens to an eta. So this is an imperfect deponent indicative for singular, I was praying. All right, some practice here with sentences, and I'll hit the pause button. All right, I hope you've been successful. Number one. We were teaching the church. Number two, I was preparing their hearts or they were preparing their hearts. Number three, the Lord was saving the men. Number four, he was in the world, and the world was not receiving him. Elambanen in that verse is an imperfect, active, indicative, third person singular. And number 5, in the house, the Lord was being glorified. Doxadzita, imperfect, middle passive indicative, third person singular, from doxadzo. All right, let's do a few more here. All right, I realize these are a little more difficult, a little longer. All right, number 6. The child was being led by the man. Egeta, imperfect, middle passive, indicative, third singular. Number 7. We were entering the boat with the Lord. Now, aser kamatha is a compound verb, and right there with the eta, that's our augment. So imperfect, deponent, indicative, first person plural. Number 8. In the same hour of that day, the faithful slaves or servants were guarding the sheep in the field, but the evil slaves were sleeping in their houses. Number 9, akuon, I was hearing the Lord, or they were hearing the Lord, and the next verb tells us that it has to be they. Exaplacenta, imperfect, deponent, indicative, third person plural. So they were hearing the Lord, and they were being amazed. Then they were going up to the temple to rejoice with his people. Chairein, present active infinitive. And number 10, they were entering the marketplace, and they were bringing the fruit of the harvest to the apostle according to their promise. So thanks, and I hope this has been helpful.